Hela, the planet of battles and suffering. The battles on it continue endlessly. It is because of this that it acquired a red hue, the hue of blood. It is all filled with monsters, skeletons, orcs, dragons, hounds, and devils, as if the planet had emerged from the underworld. There is no place for a person here, but Azazel and his comrades are not here of their own free will. And in order to survive, they fight tooth and nail. In the most difficult moments, they show support, even when it seems that death is already close. They do not lose heart. The earth shook. Our hero doesn't understand whether his legs are already shaking from fatigue. But no, everything is much worse. And then Azazel sees who or what caused the earthquake. It is a huge and terrible monster, like Satan emerging from the fire of battle. Without hesitating for a second, our hero jumped and swung his sword at the new enemy. Because if he slowed down even for a moment, he would lose his life. What do we see? Our hero, exhausted on his knees, covered in blood, without a hand, and his weapon can hardly be called a sword. They both fall. The monster died immediately, and our Azazel still had time to look at his partners. But with every second, the picture grew dimmer until it turned into darkness. Our hero sharply opens his eyes. His throat catches the newly entering air. But he cannot understand where he is and what happened to him, because there is not a scratch on him, and his hand is still there. What happened to Azazel? This mystery will remain unanswered. But one thing is clear, that he has become different. The world has become different for him, and everything will never return to the same places. He began to feel the power that allows him to control those whom he previously considered enemies. Monsters and monsters are now fighting on the same side with our hero, and he is their leader. Not only the allies have changed, but also the enemies. Now these are people who, like Azazel, came to this world to fight monsters. But one thing remained unchanged, the younger brother, who was on the same side. Years passed, and for 10 years, side by side, Azazel and Raphael walked hand in hand, back to back, and fought for each other until they met a portal to Earth. A conversation began between the brothers. The younger one wanted to go to Earth together. But from one glance of the older one, it was clear that he was staying here. Raphael just smiled and understood everything without words. 6 years have passed since then. Azazel has experienced a lot, which allowed him to become the Lord of Death, the leader of the undead, who hates all living things. He became the highest necromancer. He was the only person whom other necromancers feared and respected, and this was evident even from his feelings, because such a great desire to kill cannot be quenched. A castle built on bones and seen in blood, a castle where the ruler of the world, Hal, sat, a castle of demons where our hero, the strongest living, sat. A devoted servant, Desmond, the spirit of death, came to his master with urgent reports from the human world that would enrage Azazel. His brother Raphael was killed. All the power of anger and hatred accumulated in a black aura around the necromancer. With all the gravity of the situation, he demanded details and evidence from his informer. The spirit of death, whose ability to see every living soul in all dimensions, immediately carried out the order of its master and showed the soul of its younger brother, separated from the body. The younger brother had not changed in any way. This is exactly how Azazel remembered him from their last meeting. But the desire to find out what happened to him was stronger, and the older brother cast a spell. The look of the deceased, dark magic that allows you to see the last minutes of the soul's life. And it showed two people or monsters. It's difficult to understand, but the joy from these actions was definitely visible in their faces. The information doesn't end there. Desmond says that Raphael was the strongest of all people on the planet, but there were those who were only slightly inferior to him in strength. Having seen the whole picture, the Lord of Death decides to go to Earth, ordering Desmond to notify all the princes of their readiness to call at any moment. The 5 strongest necromancers who existed since the dark ages of Hela and wrote history with blood served Azazel, who only after defeating them captured the castle of the demons of Garen. The owner left his ward to guard the castle, because after learning about his departure, many would want to seize these lands for themselves. But their thoughts were no longer about that. The elder brother remembered their last meeting. Already in front of the open portal, the brothers hugged, and Raphael spoke about his desire to someday see his brother again. But in the vastness of the earth, when she becomes dear to him. Returning to reality, the necromancer sees how Desmond has already opened the gates for his master, filled with bloodthirstiness for all living things, intent on taking revenge on his brother's killers. Having moved to Seoul, South Korea, Azazel learns from a servant how much power he can use on Earth. The answer to this question pleased the master, because all the power can be used. Arriving on Earth, I remembered the catastrophe 16 years ago, after which meta people showed abilities that allowed them to seize power in many cities around the world, including Seoul. Then 16 years ago, portals began to open all over the Earth, leading to other dimensions, from which terrible monsters emerged, and people who had previously been called to these dimensions appeared. They began to be called returned. Arriving at the Hunters Association, Azazel was met by two girls, and were surprised that in front of them was the same one, Raphael's older brother, who refused to return to Earth. Aaron, the director of emergency situations at the association, immediately ran up, who, while still running, apologized for the girls and for the inconvenience that could have happened in these minutes. The elder brother, having listened to all this chatter, immediately got down to business. But before answering all the questions, the director asked Azazel to undergo a test, because he was not the first to declare himself an elder brother. On the way to check, our hero learns that his brother has earned great fame and wealth during his years on Earth, and many wanted to get it all by posing as his relative. After undergoing a blood test for mana and genetic information, everyone was convinced that Azazel was the only relative of the deceased. Aaron immediately took Raphael's blood brother to his office so that he could change clothes. But the main idea of this action was so that information about the appearance of a relative would reach the department. Having changed into dry clothes, the necromancer received a folder with brief information about his brother, and immediately wanted to find out what happened to him over the years, which guilds he belonged to, and most importantly, how he died. It all happened during a special operation in which hunters from several countries participated. Their task was to clear the dungeon, where Raphael defeated the boss of the dungeon. But as a result of an accident, he died. Our hero realized that something was not pure here. There was no accident, because he saw how other metahumans killed him. But apparently they set everything up well and tried to hide the real circumstances of his death. Without giving a sign in action, but having set a clear goal in his head to get to the bottom of the truth, he took the keys to his brother's property, which Aaron brought him, and left the association building. Such harsh behavior tensed Aaron, and looking at Azazel's back, he decided to be more careful with him. But at the same time, he understood that the fame of his older brother Raphael could exceed himself. While in Raphael's apartment, studying his case, and looking at photographs from his life, he notices one interesting person. This is the guy who was in the last minutes of his brother's life. But here they are not at enmity. Here they have the same tattoos, the same guild, for which Azazel has new questions. Finding no information about other members of the guild, the necromancer went to Sochodon, the office of the Garen Guild, which was once headed by Raphael. That hunter was on a mission. At the Sinsa station, he closed the gate. But our hero did not want to wait for him to return, and went to the station to meet the hunter Abigor. Gates are what people called portals to the dungeons of other dimensions, which are easy to recognize, unlike Hela. The portal guards guessed from the outline of Azazel's face that this was the same older brother that Aaron mentioned. Having made sure that other hunters entered the portal along with Abigor, the necromancer went into the portal, and the guards, not having time to stop him, reported to their superiors, abdicating all responsibility. In the new world, he immediately felt where the energy of the hunters was coming from, and chose a further path for himself. But first he used one of his spells. Having created an army for himself from the skeletons of fallen monsters, Azazel went to the possible culprit in the death of his younger brother. And in the dungeon, Raphael's former comrade cut off the monster's head and with a smile on his face ended the battle with his quick victory. The joy of Abigor's henchmen knew no bounds. They praised him, and he himself exalted himself above his former friend, saying that all the merits of the former commander were lies. Only one newcomer did not agree with him and said that Raphael was the strongest, for which he immediately received a punch in the stomach from the new commander. After which, the question about the strongest was asked again, but young Tamiel's answer changed, not because of convictions, but because of the fear of death. Abigor's pride still did not rise to the occasion, and going into the portal, he gave the order to his servants to teach the newcomer a lesson, and then go after him. They beat him. They said that he expressed himself too boldly for his age, when his teacher was no longer alive, and he did not have the protection that he had before. But the devoted student's thoughts were only about the times when Raphael was the leader of the Garen Guild, who were the best in their field and did not bring problems at all. After all, he did not make mistakes and always looked for those responsible for them. At the same time, he made many enemies. Many wanted to get rid of him, but they could not argue with his strength. When Tamiel's meta-human abilities awakened, he knew who Raphael was and decided to join his guild to repay his sister for taking care of him. The student was under the wing of the teacher, until that very accident. Because after that, everything changed. The hunters walking online began to show their true faces, making the student prey. Tamiel hated them all with all his soul. He wanted to kill them, but he was still far from their strength, and such actions could only bring him closer to death. Suddenly, in addition to blows, Abigor's henchmen heard the sound of footsteps. At that moment, Azazel rose with his army of monsters. It was as if he didn't care about anything, neither the beating nor what had happened before. Only one question interested him. Where was the commander of this detachment now? The guys immediately started whispering about who it was, what he was doing here, why he needed their leader, and how he got here. To all their questions, the necromancer had his own, "Where is Abegor now?" But in response, in a rude form, he was told that he had left. And who are you to ask about him? Having received no response from the henchman, Azazel turned his attention to the bloody young guy lying on the floor and asked the same question. Such a gesture hurt the feelings of Tamiel's offenders. They began to surround the main character and ask even more questions, the answer to which they would not like. The necromancer, without making a single muscle movement, pinned one of the meta people to the wall. He was now hanging on the arrow of one of the summoned monsters. The mana around Azazel became more and more visible, and the summoned monsters looked more terrible. And he again, but for the last time, asked his question. The henchmen immediately began to attack the hero, although they still did not understand who was in front of them and why he was behaving so strangely. They failed to reach the necromancer. They fought the entire battle with skeletons, Hela's warriors. One of the squad was already impaled on a spear, and the death of his allies was only a matter of time. The head of one of them flew to Tamiel's feet, and he screamed in horror, fearing that this would happen to him too. The last of the newcomer's offenders was struck in the back with a sword. He still did not understand who they met in the dungeons. The Lord of Death and his devoted servants headed towards the only survivor who could provide any information. The question remained the same, but before answering, Tamiel's thoughts haunted him. Who is this? Why does he need Abegor? Will I survive? The same one was in a club in Gangnam. Having learned this, Azazel ordered the newcomer to take him there if he wanted to live. After going through the portal, returning to the station, they were met by guards who were surprised that there were only 2 survivors. Dear YouTube viewer, I tried very hard for you. Please support me by subscribing and commenting. Have a nice day. Immediately questions started pouring in about where the others were, where Abegor was, how they defeated the boss, what even happened there. Tamiel told a different story. According to him, the squad leader escaped, and the rest of the members were killed by the monster. But Azazel arrived and saved the last survivor. The guard wrote down everything in the report, but what else could he do because the words of these people were the only information they could have. The guards responded by telling the young guy how lucky he was that he was saved by the older brother of his former mentor. The student's surprise knew no bounds. Tamiel immediately began to understand what enormous power Azazel possessed, that he, like Raphael, was returned from another dimension. The guards had their own picture of the situation, because the rumor that Abegor left the dirty work to his squad and left himself was confirmed. Numerous complaints came against him, but the influence of the Garen Guild was great, and it was impossible to influence directly. And on top of everything, there was a struggle for power within the guild. The guard wanted to write the 2 of them in the survivor column, but after Azazel's menacing look, the decision changed. Tamiel got goosebumps being next to his mentor's brother, because his character was very different from his previous mentor. Approaching one of the possible shelters, in which Abegor had been more than once, they went to the entrance. Raphael's older brother learned that after the death of his mentor, the young student found himself in the detachment of a man who had changed a lot since those times. Entering the club, passing by a crowd of ordinary people, the young hunter and necromancer moved to Abegor's room. At the entrance to the room stood one of the meta people, who was already waiting to meet with the mentor's team, but did not expect to see these 2 people. After exchanging a couple of phrases, he learned that this was Raphael's brother, and was also not left without the daring sayings of the returnee. He could not answer them, because this is not an ordinary metahuman whom he would knock out with one blow. Here he only opened the door for guests. Entering a room illuminated by ultraviolet light, they saw a company of people, and with a quick glance they began to look for Abegor, looking everyone in the face, counting the number of people. Azazel, among 7 people, did not see the one he was looking for. The main one started asking questions about what one of Abegor's squad was doing here and what kind of person came with him. Tamiel's answer caused a storm of surprise and emotion among the 7, because in front of them stood the brother of the former leader of the guild. The same one did not express emotions, but still pursuing his goal, asked about Abegor's real whereabouts. The main one stood up and introduced himself as Zadkill, the commander of the assault battalion and the superior of the man Azazel was looking for, offering to sit down and ordering drinks to be brought into the room, due to the arrival of the former head of the guild. Other people in the room asked why Raphael's brother was looking for the hunter of their battalion. Immediately, Abegor's boss began to tell him that he had been getting involved in various unpleasant stories lately, and would not be able to tell where he was now. Zadkill said that he would pass on all the necessary information, but the necromancer, in an orderly tone, said to contact him right away. The boss was taken aback. He couldn't believe that they were talking to him like that. But at the same time, he let the situation go. Because in front of him was the one who had been returned. Trying to turn the situation in his favor, he said that he would send one of his fighters after him, but Azazel would need to tell him why he needed him. But the main character did not take his eyes off them, because he was ready to kill anyone who was somehow involved in the death of his brother. I decided to act carefully to find out as much information as possible from the people in the room. Zadkiel spoke of his great respect for the late leader, but in response he only received a question about what he knew about his hunter. Tamiel at that moment was attacked with questions about where the other members of the squad were, because they went there together. The young hunter immediately remembered all the deaths of his former partners in his head, but he could not tell the truth. The monster was too strong and killed all the members of the squad. Only he was lucky to survive. That's what Tamiel said. But Abegor was here and said that he had killed the monster and left the others to clean up. The tension in the room rose. A continuation of this information appeared that after the detachment commander left, other monsters appeared and everything happened to them. Zadkiel got distracted by the loud conversation and argument and wanted to find out what happened between them. In response, the battalion commander ordered to be quieter because he had an important guest at the table. But the interrogation did not end. Tamiel remained alive. This was the main question, because he was the one from the detachment. The only survivor pointed to the second guest that it was thanks to him that he remained alive. Zadkiel became interested in the current situation and decided to find out what abilities the returned one had. Drops of cold sweat flowed from the interrogated person's face. He did not know what words to choose so that the answer would please everyone. Azazel abruptly stood up from the table and prepared to leave and called Tamiel, explaining that they had nothing more to talk about. But the young hunter was not released immediately because he did not tell them what happened in the cave with the monsters. The battalion commander understood from the necromancer's gaze that he needed to release the second one and ordered his men to do so. Tamiel left to fetch his new acquaintance, but people shouted at him to come back quickly, otherwise his sister would be in trouble. The door slammed behind them, and a conversation arose in the room that there was no need to express yourself so boldly in front of the newcomers, especially until you knew their abilities. The note Zadkiel gave to Azazel included the address of the crematorium, which amused all the metahumans in the room. The commander was pleased with his decision because the crematorium was the place of other returnees who, in his opinion, would teach Brother Raphael good manners. He called Abegor, who was relaxing in another club waiting for his squad, and told him to come to their headquarters for an important conversation. Despite being sent to the crematorium, a place from which no one returns, Zadkiel was nervous about this new arrival. Arriving at the place, Tamiel was surprised where his new friend had brought him, to a place that was dealing with the consequences of dungeon raids. The hunter was mired in doubts because he had never seen Abegor ever come here. What did the battalion commander say? Azazel learned from his brother's student what this place was, and that the purpose of the place was to hunt traitors and spies from other guilds. This place was established after the death of the former leader, and it was unlikely to meet the detachment commander here, Tamiel said. But under the threat of death, the necromancer ordered his partner to lead him through this place, despite the fact that he had never been here. Inside the building, they already knew about the arrival of Raphael's older brother, and they laughed at him among themselves, because they had not seen such a fool who came to them himself. But the ridicule stopped. Tasks began to arrive, to meet the guests of the crematorium and say that Abegor was here. At the same time, a meeting was held in the department about Azazel, and it was he who became the subject of their concern. This event was conducted by Aaron, saying that the newcomer believed about the accident and went to his brother's apartment, where it was easy to follow him. But other participants in the meeting were still worried about the question of why he had arrived now, after his brother's death, and not earlier. It's a coincidence of circumstances, and that's it. So stop worrying and making mountains out of molehills, said the director of emergency situations. But the whole hall reacted differently to this phrase, because they had to sacrifice hundreds of people to get rid of Raphael. One of all calmed the screams of the crowd, because the former leader went against the system, and the rest of the returnees and metahumans were at the same time. Despite their strength, against a squad of professional hunters, they would lose, said the second. This community has decided to just keep an eye on Azazel for now, but if he starts putting a spoke in the wheels, they will simply get rid of him. The man sitting above everyone else ordered to find out the abilities of the returnee, and not even bother him with other questions. This man was the leader, one of the most important people in South Korea, who decided a large number of issues. At this point, the file and all personal information about Raphael was erased, and the entire congregation was told. Everyone took out stones for the journey, ordered to monitor the actions of the necromancer, and disappeared into the opened portals. A man with a cigarette in his mouth and a dissatisfied face came out to meet the two who had arrived at the crematorium. The one who introduced himself turned out to be Yofil, who had been working in the crematorium of the Garen Guild since his return to Earth. The one who met the guests said that he knew that this was Raphael's brother. He was also interested in why he needed Abigor. "It's none of your business, mortal. We were told that he is here, so lead us to him," Azazel answered. Jofil thought this answer was impolite, and in response, he told the guests that this is not how they communicate in this place. "I give you one chance. Otherwise it will end badly for you." The necromancer calmly expressed himself. "Your brother is no longer here. Now you have no power here, and you don't dare ask us about anything," answered the man with the cigarette. But this is all that only caused Azazel to smile. At the same time, he contacted Desmond and asked to show all the souls that were in the room. Jofil has a thought in his head. He is just as crazy as his little brother. In the reflection of the sword of one of the summoned, he saw his brothers in arms, which is why he dropped his cigarette on the floor. Right in front of him, his commander is being cut with the same sword. Yes, this is an illusion, but fear has already overtaken him and forced him to take action. With a pistol shot, he pierced the head of one of the warriors and began to tactically retreat from the monsters. Jofil endowed the bullets of his weapon with magical powers, which allowed them to inflict damage on the rebels. Moving away from new opponents, I couldn't wrap my head around the thought of how this Azazel dared to attack him in their building. Dodging new types of weapons, swords, and bone bullets, he used up all his magic bullets. When the rebels had already overtaken Jofil, he fired one of the bullets at the emergency button to raise the alarm. The sword of one of the skeletons was already in the shoulder. The crematorium worker was bleeding and with hatred decided to use the pistol again. With all the remaining mana, the skeleton was shot, stabbing the sword into it. One of Jofil's wards arrived and found out what was happening here, and was given the task of destroying everyone in the room. The commander himself fled from the skeletons, holding on to his life with all his strength so as not to die. Meeting Azazel's gaze, he shouted that the necromancer was a corpse after all his actions. Jofil wondered why now. Why, when he had lost his skill, he had to fight an army of resurrected ones. At that moment, a skeleton with a sword was already flying at him from behind, ready to cut the target in half. But there was one thing. The other guardians of the crematorium arrived in time and deflected the attacks aimed at their commander. The commander was given one of the strength-restoring potions to heal his wounds and continue the battle. He immediately set the order not to play with the arriving guests, but to kill them at any opportunity that arose. Azazel calmed Tamiel's worries. He was afraid of dying from such a large amount of enemy ammunition. The crematorium squad came face to face with the necromancer, but they did not yet understand how much his power exceeded theirs. Jofil's warriors began firing full clips from their cannons, shooting to kill in order to win this battle. The skeletons were not an easy target, because they dodged the bullets flying at them, which the squad did not expect. Azazel continued the attack with his warriors, who frightened the opponents with their capabilities. They, in turn, with fear in their eyes, tried to replenish their supplies of weapons and ammunition. No matter how the commander and his subordinates tried to resist the resurrected, one by one they died from their swords. Different types of weapons were used in the battle, but none of them led to success. The entire crematorium was already in the fire of battle. Azazel did not stop directing his warriors towards the enemies. Jofil wanted to finish with them quickly, but he had never seen such rebels with such strength and combat experience before. Having found at least some kind of shelter, the squad opposing the necromancer decided what to do in order to kill the enemy. But at that moment, dungeon monsters were approaching them. Sensing the power of the squad's mana, the skeletons burst into the room, breaking through the wall with the help of magic, and again began to fight the team with the remnants of the enemies. Before they could carry out the attack, one of the team lost his head in a precise attack from one of the rebels. Jofil immediately jumped into a hole in the floor to try to avoid the same fate. The squad leader decides to carry out a physical attack, because from the experience of past battles, for necromancers this ended in death. Even in this action he was not given freedom. The skeleton attacks continued without interruption. He repels this attack, and believing in himself with a smile on his face, we look at his next target, Brother Raphael. The skeletons suddenly began to die from the remnants of the squad, and it seemed that the battle had turned in the other direction. But it only seemed so because Azazel waited for the right moment for a surprise attack that would decide the outcome of the battle. And the attack had an effect. Several more members of the detachment lost their lives in the battle with the rebels. The necromancer summoned more warriors from Hela, whose abilities were superior to the previous ones, because now they could make long-range attacks. Surprising Jofil, one of the archer's skeletons pointed his bow in his direction and shot an arrow into his opponent's body. The arrow hit the liver, but without allowing him to catch his breath, the melee skeleton attacked and slammed the squad leader to the floor. The great necromancer approached Jofil, who, in complete despondency and fear, shouted that no one should approach him. One of the monsters stuck a dagger in the leg of the surviving captain, who, due to the damage received, was already trembling from the approach of death. Azazel told the squad leader that if they had brought Abigor right away, everyone would have survived. The crematorium was filled with screams. Jofil said that the necromancer would regret returning to Earth and standing up against the guild. But at the moment, only he could regret his whereabouts, because his squad was killed, and Azazel's servants continued to torture him. Covered in blood and wounds, he begged the necromancer for death, because he was going to take all the information about Abegor with him to the grave. Jofil's eyes were already closing on their own, no matter how much he resisted. But death was approaching him with every step the skeleton took. Azazel cast the Look of the Dead spell and saw the information that interested him. The crematorium building was burning, and the heroes went towards the club because it was there that Abegor was supposed to return. Tamiel was worried that the guild would hunt them after the death of the entire squad, but the necromancer did not care about that. The young hunter was worried about his life since he was seen with Azazel, but he was more afraid for his sister. The necromancer wanted to find out what kind of place or detachment this was, calling themselves the Sect of the Crypts. It was with them that Abegor had to be in order to lie low and not be found. Azazel learned about this place from Jofil in his head. The Crypt Sect is the largest criminal metahuman organization in the country, whose plans were often thwarted by Raphael. Many people who awakened their abilities after the disaster 16 years ago considered their powers to be a gift, not a curse. The necromancer said that he would take care of Tamiel's safety, but he must tell everything he knows about the sect. At the club at this time, a dialogue was taking place between Zadkiel and Abegor. The former was interested in who the latter had spilled everything about Raphael's death. The squad leader was clearly unhappy that his charge was being hunted by the older brother of the former leader of the guild. Abegor assured his commander that all evidence of the murder had been cleared, and in general that the arrival of Azazel would not cause big problems. These same two went to the sect to lay low, despite the conflict between one of them with the Crypts. Zadkiel left one of the squad in charge and ordered him to monitor what was happening in the club. He again felt like a guard dog. Just a couple of minutes later, the new senior saw two approaching people on the monitor camera. It was the brother of the previous guild master with his ally, which made everyone nervous and decided to immediately report this to the commander. The appointed commander's solution was to let them in without resistance and then deal with them. The squad remaining in the club understood that they could not do without blood, but in order to slightly reduce the damage to their headquarters, they used magic. Having created a barrier that could then be reduced and everything unnecessary burned, the metahumans became concerned about a possible fight. After all, you need to suffer minimal losses, which is quite difficult in the fight against the returned one. I had to get some magical daggers that the Crypt Sect had invented. Their magic was in collecting mana. When you pierce someone with this knife, they immediately lose mana giving it to the knife. The entire room was overly confident, as if they were ready to report to the boss that they had accidentally killed a necromancer in battle. Two guests, whom everyone was already waiting for, entered the room with not entirely warm hugs. Tamiel looked at his temporary mentor from behind, trembling with fear and hoping that he would be protected from the enemy squad. Azazel immediately had a question about where Zadkiel, the commander of the detachment in which Abegor was located, had gone. In response, I received only arrogant answers from the appointed senior, who told me to hold my tongue. They had a chance, the necromancer thought, and awakened his underground army, which at that very moment filled the entire space. The entire squad was perplexed by the actions of the brother of the previous leader, because for the first time they saw his abilities in action. From the magic of one rebel, all the light in the room went out, and Zadkiel's minions took up their weapons. It was already late. Next to each of them stood a skeleton from Gila, each of which had a personal weapon. In the last seconds of his life, the temporary captain of the squad realized that Azazel was not just a necromancer, he was death itself. The upper floors of the club did not even suspect what was happening below. Because of this, they calmly played cards. There's a knock on the door. A bloody partner comes in, or what's left of him. The body of the corpse suddenly begins to change beyond recognition. It swells at different points, as if it is about to explode. The surprised faces of people who had previously been calmly playing were already starting to give me goosebumps. The body explodes. Everyone scatters in different directions. The effect of surprise in this tactic of Azazel worked well. The light was still on in the building of the Crypt Sect. Zadkiel and Abegor, who arrived there, were talking with the head of the organization. Aragos wanted to know the reason why the battalion commander wanted to leave his ward here. The commander argues for this action by saying that they are still part of the Crypt family. The head of the organization answered them with one phrase while Raphael was alive. They didn't need him, and when problems arose, they crawled in at the first opportunity. Zadkiel sent his subordinate for coffee so that he would not interfere with a serious conversation with his harsh phrases. In the dialogue, the commander asked if Aragos knew who Astaroth was, the monster who was the first president of the Association of the Returned. He was Abegor's half-brother, who was not particularly touched for the same reason. The people of this particular half-brother were hunting for Raphael, an elite detachment consisting of the strongest fighters. The commander of the crypt sect knew that the impudent youth had his own people, but he would like to cooperate with such people. Zadkiel agreed to put in a good word for Arygos, but he had to shelter Abigor for a while. The battalion commander lit a cigarette and thought about how his guys from the crematorium were, because they had called for a long time. A call came on the phone. The boss was told that there had been an explosion in the office and his squad was injured. The commander was angry from such news. But when he found out that Azazel did it, he literally flared up with rage and hatred. By order of the head of the sect, Zadkiel calmed his ardor and decided to take serious measures to destroy the enemy. Having called his deputy, he ordered to gather all the members of the assault squad and come to the headquarters of the organization, where he himself moved after the conversation. Looking into the souls of meta-people who met on the way to the sect, Azazel learned the information he needed. At this time, Zadkiel called Tamiel and told him not to leave their location because if they tried to hide, they would even be pulled out of the ground. The young hunter was again afraid that his short life would soon come to an end, regardless of whether they ran away or stayed here. The necromancer contacted his servant Desmond to find out what the situation was in Hell and whether someone had decided to seize his castle. All those who laid claim to the throne somehow found out that the ruler was not in the castle and tried in every way to find out where he had gone. Your troops from the 1st to the 7th Legion want to be called to the ground and fight for their master, in order to somehow quench their thirst for death and blood. But Azazel understood that by calling on all the troops at once, the destruction of the entire human race would only be a matter of time. To defeat opponents, the main character needs to distribute the forces of all his troops in order to use each of them most effectively. Desmond's first priority was to defend the castle, and to notify the 6th and 7th Legions that they were fully ready for conscription. The servant said that he had followed all the instructions of his master, and immediately notified that several souls were approaching the necromancer's location. Several cars arrived containing magicians from the guild who were stronger than the destroyed crematorium squad. Just getting out of the cars, pointing all his weapons at the target, Zadkiel immediately used his magic and sent a ball of fire at Azazel, but the attack was blocked. The commander, with a grin on his face, came out of the fire with his squad and said that the elder brother would go to the next world for Raphael. The souls of the 7th Legion were ready. The necromancer ordered his servant to summon them right now. Speaking about the great achievements of the enemy, about his kills and victories over the troops of the Garen Guild, Zadkiel barely noticed the rebel skeleton behind him. At the last moment, the squad managed to turn away from an unexpected attack of skeletons from underground. The squad began to defend themselves, took out a weapon, pointed it at the enemy, but immediately lost their pistol when a dungeon warrior cut it with a sword. Subsequently, the same sword ended up in the body of a man from the detachment, who after that clearly could no longer resist. Abigor, using his abilities, fought against the large number of rebels with the help of fire. Looking into Azazel's eyes, he saw scarlet-red pupils. Then the puzzle in his head took shape. The newcomer was a necromancer, the mere sight of which makes you want to kill yourself. New monsters emerged from the ground. This time they already had shields that reflected bullets imbued with magic. While the squad was trying to fight off the skeletons attacking from the front, they began to be attacked by new rebels from underground. One by one, members of Zadkiel's squad died at the hands of those summoned. Only he dealt with them with the help of magic, but hoped that their number would soon decrease. There were too many of them. The skeletons killed the guild squad, as if they were completely inexperienced fighters. Anger burned in the eyes of the battalion commander. In his hand, which he raised above his head, a small magical sun shone. But a moment before the attack, with a lightning strike from his sword, the necromancer's warrior cut off Zadkiel's hand. The sun, intended for the attack, fell on the attacker and burned the commander, causing him colossal damage. Bleeding and covered in burns, the battalion chief crawls towards his dead subordinates. At that moment, Azazel approaches him. Kills him with the power of his servant. The skeleton's spear pierces the body of the fallen Zadkiel, hitting him directly in the heart. The necromancer uses the Death Gaze spell and tells Desmond to remember all the information he just saw. After a report that he remembered all the faces, voices, and abilities of those he saw, he receives the command to summon the Dullahan of the 7th Legion. A white-haired guy immediately appears who had a staff with skulls in his hand. His name was Lemur. Fear and respect for the owner were seen in his eyes. The voice of the servant who appeared evoked images from the hellish kingdom, resonating with death and deadly screams. Azazel said to fill the minds of those who killed his brother with nightmares, those people whom Desmond remembered after the look of the deceased. Excited to finally use his abilities on people, Lemur was not going to hesitate and wanted to begin his task. He chose the recently killed Zadkiel as his first target, approached him, took him by the head, raised his staff above the ground, and began to use the spell. The branches coming out of the servant's weapons grew and grew, heading towards the dead body, enveloping it in their nets. With thin needles, the staff entered the body of the former battalion commander and began to absorb not mana, but blood. Tamiel fell off his feet. He saw the faces of Abigor, Astaroth, and the president of the association Samael on Lemur's weapon. He knew all of them from the time when he followed the guildmaster Raphael. Zadkil's withered body remained motionless, like skin wrapped around a skeleton and roasted in the fire of its owner. Now the time has come to take revenge on the people who were involved in the death of Raphael. They began to have nightmares. The first spell touched Astaroth, who in surprise dropped the glass from his hand, shuddering with his whole body. Standing up abruptly, he began to leave the club. He wanted to figure out what happened to him now, because he didn't feel any power of magic. The next one was Abigor. He even screamed from the nightmares in his head. But when asked by the people nearby, he said that everything was fine. At first glance, it would seem that the president of the association was not affected by this, and he simply wanted to find out from Aaron what Raphael's older brother wanted. Samael's secretary called the emergency president, who knocked on the door a couple of minutes later and entered the office. He said that he did not notice anything suspicious in Azazel, even using his hunting instincts, only depression due to the death of his brother. The president of the association ordered contact with all hunters who fought with Raphael, saying that the situation was becoming an emergency. The venue will be a conference hall, where they will discuss all matters related to the Necromancer. But all this time there was a nightmare over Samael, intended for him. He just didn't show it because of his extensive experience in the organization. Nightmare Lammer kept telling the president that he knew who was responsible for Raphael's death, and after a while he disappeared. The head of the association understood that he was almost directly told that it was his fault and that the accident was a cover-up. All suspicions fell on the brother, who had already requested documents and the personal file of the deceased master of the association. The abilities of the possible enemy were not known. One could only assume that he was a necromancer, and the director did not understand at all what kind of creature was in the office. Due to his recent arrival, according to Samael, he should have been weak and only adapted to local conditions. There is a guild meeting about the returnee, who turns out to be Raphael's older brother, and he has his sights set on everyone involved in the murder. The crematorium, whose warriors seemed invincible, had already been destroyed and burned down along with the building. Zadkil's squad, considered one of the strongest in the organization, was completely wiped off the face of the earth. All these actions, according to the president, were caused by suspicions that the death of Azazel's brother was not an accident. The meeting became agitated, questions were asked about the hunt for them and how he found out, although he had not been on Earth for so many years. The meeting wanted to respond to such actions of the Necromancer, but at the same time they all did not understand where the owner's deputy had been all this time. And he was clearing out the dungeons that he entered before brother Raphael arrived on Earth, and apparently the monsters turned out to be stronger than expected. The plan that the president announced was extremely simple: hold a press conference and announce a decree on the murder of Azazel. But in order to deserve such a fate, he had to commit a serious crime, although half the congregation no longer cared what crime they pinned on him. To deal with the master's brother, the guild needed a larger number of hunters than usual, and also needed to develop an appropriate strategy. To win, they would need to make every hunter want Azazel dead, but the question of how to do this was open. About 40 million people with abilities could hunt him, but how to force them, the meeting wondered. The president offered as a reward accommodation at Gangnam Castle, a place that was only for the elite. The meeting was against this arrangement. They could not make such arrangements, because whoever receives such a reward could lead to internal conflict between the hunters. If this happens, the castle residents will declare war, and if the reward is denied, a riot will arise among the hunters. The president was told that after such actions, he could become a new target of the hunt, and given the stronger connection of Gangnam Castle with other nations, the guild could subsequently be destroyed. But the president stood on one thing: to stop all further actions of Azazel and act more decisively, because by sending one detachment at a time, they would simply lose troops. The head of the association decided for now to declare brother Raphael a criminal, and then act depending on the reaction of people. The meeting agreed, because they don't even know all the abilities of their opponent yet, and they can announce the reward in the form of a castle later. Samael ended the meeting and ordered Aaron to hold a press conference to announce the situation to the whole world. The crypt sect was already filled with corpses. The walls and floors were smeared with blood, and screams of pain could still be heard in the corridors. The skeletons continued to kill the sect warriors one by one, and people could not even resist such strong enemies. One member of the organization, a half-dead guy, reached for his walkie-talkie to warn his boss about what had happened. But you can't hide anything from the skeletons. They see and hear everything. They cannot expose their master with such an oversight. Seeing the approaching silhouette of Azazel, the guy could not think about anything else except the approach of death. The necromancer asked the guy if he knew the reason for the arrival of brother Raphael on Earth, but he remained silent, afraid to say something wrong. And without giving an answer, he simply began to beg for mercy and say that he would do everything possible just to stay alive. He was immediately told to bring a list of names of all the people responsible for the death of Azazel's brother. The barely alive guy understood what the necromancer wanted and stepped forward to show what he would definitely like. He opened a secret cabinet with a large number of documents that contained interesting information about many events. But Azazel took only one, in which everyone involved in the murder of his brother was written, with photographs and dossiers. The guy was pleased that he had pleased the brother of the former master and asked what else he could do. But this man no longer represented any need for the returnee, and the skeletons replenished their collection of dead. And Lemur took the soul of this boy and imbued his staff with it, causing the skulls on it to move. The skeletons continued the merciless slaughter, in which they always emerged victorious and left no chance for their opponents. And Lammer, passing by the corpses, replenished his collection of corpses and then followed his master. Tamiel wondered what his temporary mentor would do with so many souls, but his thoughts were interrupted by a notification on his watch. The notification was about the creation of a public order to kill Azazel, more details about which were now broadcast on TV. The young hunter immediately drew the attention of his mentor's brother to the news on TV, which already mentioned the destruction of the crematorium and a series of murders. The director continued his speech, saying that the newcomer was mistaken about his brother's death, and with his actions wanted to dishonor his memory. The whole of Tokyo was asked to call the direct line in case of any suspicion, and not to engage in direct combat with the person returned. At the end of the program, a reward was announced for the capture of the named criminal, and for not bringing to justice for the accidental murder of the above. Raphael became nervous and said that the guild already knew about everything, and that they needed to change their location. The young guy didn't understand why these two were acting so calmly. He thought that they were already coming up with a plan. But Azazel was thinking about something else, wondering if all these people were involved in the death of his younger brother. But he decided to check this only after killing them, using the spell of the gaze of the deceased. Tamiel, when asked to at least warn about any movements, was told to go wherever he wanted. The hunter became worried. He had just been thrown away like some kind of toy that was no longer useful. The clock again received a notification that all members of the assault troops of the Garen Guild need to read the known information about Azazel and report if they find out new information. After reading the SMS, the phone received a call from Abigor. His voice was unfriendly. Threats rained down. Tamiel was told that he would end up in the other world, like everyone else in the crematorium and in the club, for betraying the guild. The young and abandoned hunter was already imagining his death, realizing that he was clearly visible on the cameras of the club and the crematorium. The squad leader kept threatening and threatening, talking about how he would kill Azazel, and then, in front of Tamiel's eyes, would torture his sister. The young hunter hung up the phone and decisively rushed towards the exit. The necromancer was already being watched on the street on the roofs of houses. There were snipers who were ready to release the hook when ordered. The surveillance team was surprised to see Azazel at all, because after the news was announced, many would be afraid to go out. But even while completing the task, they did not stop thinking about the strength of the new criminal, since he caused such a commotion at the presidential level. Also in the conversation, there was a phrase about the president and his deputy. They were also returned. According to the stories of the once-living Raphael, the place where he and his brother ended up is one of the most terrible, and if you manage to return, then your strength is really great. The leader of the squad ordered to calm down until the entire squad noticed the necromancer, and most importantly, to concentrate on the mission. Azazel entered his brother's apartment and began to look around and go into each of the rooms. Going out onto the roof of the house, he used his power, saying aloud a spell. The dead will rise, and all living things will fall. Insects, which could be considered zombies, flew towards the building in which the necromancer and a squad of hunters were located. When they reached their goal, Azazel used his magic once again, and a dome of black matter appeared over the building. The hunters prepared to act according to plan, and took up the necessary fighting positions. People were evacuated from apartments in nearby buildings, and more hunters were added to the possible battle site. All the detachments were ready to begin the special operation. All positions were occupied and prepared. All that remained was to wait for one person. And here he arrived in a car, the captain of the 4th raid squad of the Garen Guild. The head of the housing management office asked the commander to try to attack carefully and with the least possible losses. The captain, in turn, recalled what was said on the news. The enemy was strong, and it would be difficult to resist him without damaging buildings. The office worker spoke of his respect for the guild and said that there were residents who wanted to take part in the operation. But the guild will not be responsible for the damage they caused, the commander warned. And when he wished them good luck, he replied that they wish good luck only to weak losers. The captain's assistant reported on the situation that Azazel was now in his brother's apartment. For him, the situation seemed simple. There was no need to lead him into a corner. He was already almost trapped. All that remained was to surround him, and victory was in his pocket. But it was still too early to attack. A messenger came running and said that the 3rd and 5th detachments had not yet arrived, but the 6th would arrive in 5 minutes. The captain decided to start without them. They would arrive when the 4th squad was already inside. But the messenger asked about the deputy master's reaction to this. "So, after such information he will speed up," said the captain of the 4th detachment. The commander began to act, ordered all magicians to erect a barrier on the building to neutralize Azazel's actions. Barriers appeared one after another, thereby overlapping and reinforcing each other. The 1st and 2nd squads began to act, while the 3rd and 4th squads waited their turn on the orders of the captain. The hunters moved along the floors, keeping a distance from each other, and did not even realize that they themselves would find themselves in a trap. Lemur reported to his master about the approach of human souls, but the necromancer ordered to wait for the moment when the magicians were in the corridor of our floor. The hunters climbed floor by floor, heading towards the killer of their former colleagues and partners. The Dullahan of the 7th Legion listened to his master and looked forward to meeting the metahumans. The squad had just arrived at the door they needed and, trying to behave unnoticed, were about to take action. The commander of this special unit built tactics in his head and voiced an order to rearrange the order of the detachment. The people with firearms moved forward, and the archers went to the rear of the team. They were getting closer and closer to the door. Mistakes could not be made. The captain asked about the readiness of the 2nd group. Everyone was ready. Positions were taken. Weapons were loaded, and sights were aimed in the direction of the possible appearance of the newcomer. The captain gave the command to begin the operation and took a ball from his pants that would act as an explosive. Charging it with magical energy, he gave it the desired shape for installation on the door. Unexpectedly for everyone, the sword of one of the skeletons passed through the door, piercing both the explosives and the commander. The team immediately became concerned about the captain's condition and asked how he was feeling, because they did not see the whole situation from behind. The head of the operation began to fall on his back, releasing the already activated bomb from his hands. The team wanted to immediately rush into the attack, but their plans were changed by an explosion that happened at that very moment. While they were trying to navigate the space, the corridor began to be filled with unusual guests. The army of skeletons marched towards their enemy, red eyes as if filled with the blood of past victims. The information was immediately transmitted via radio to another squad so that they knew what they were dealing with. The signal did not stop. The crunching of bones was transmitted, but not the bones of skeletons, but of other magicians. But the squad didn't know this. Because of this, the joy in their faces only grew, because fighting the necromancer was only more interesting. Only after the screams from the walkie-talkie did some of them change their facial expressions and get goosebumps. The captain of this detachment immediately ordered to increase attention, and at the slightest appearance of the undead, shoot to kill. For higher-ranking hunters, this only added to the excitement of hunting a target. The attackers will get ready. This command was given to the squad to begin the attack. At this time, Lammer and his master walked towards their enemies. Their faces were calm and not tense. With the help of magic, the dead people of the first squad began to get up and follow the master of their bodies. The necromancer's army not only did not decrease in number, but quite the contrary, it grew and grew. The commander of the 4th detachment only listened to the cries of pain and pleas for mercy through the walkie-talkie. He himself remained cold-blooded, and the people around him broke out in cold sweat from such sounds. The first team was already out of action, although according to the captain, the enemies were just ordinary skeletons. The 2nd detachment did not respond. As it was in the fire of battle, no one expected such power from the enemy. The generation of ideas to resist the enemy did not stop. The commander gave the order to remove the imposed barriers. He wanted to start hitting the walls of the building with fiery blows in order to burn the enemy to the ground in their heat. The squad was surprised by such a desperate and unsafe decision of their commander. But there was nothing left to do except follow the instructions given. The barrier began to weaken and disappear. The commander was overwhelmed with emotions. He demanded that the shelling begin immediately and not stop until his instructions. The magician began to generate fiery energy around himself and form the shape of a ball for attack. Through the glass doors of the building, the party saw the approach of an army of skeletons, intending to kill everyone. The doors were blocked by other members of the squad, trying to hold back the onslaught of the enemies of the dungeon. The fire magician completed the spell to create the required size of the ball. This attack immediately burned all the skeletons to ashes, leaving only ashes of the newly advancing enemies. The captain only rejoiced at the success of such a combination, but did not notice at all what was happening behind him. A sharp explosion from the fire area cut short the commander's joy, and when he looked back, he was greatly surprised. The enemy was coming towards them through the pillars of flame, along with an entire army behind them, the composition of which the captain did not even know. The building, in which 2 guild units had already died, could collapse at any moment. The battle with the rebels continued. people tried not to break down and withstand the enemy. The archers began shooting at the skeletons and using barrage fire to hit as many targets as possible. And this worked out 100%, because the arrows also had magic and exploded upon arrival at their destination. The stormtroopers also did not lag behind and pierced the skulls of the summoned monsters with bullets. The skeletons died and died, only bones remained from them. The detachment's attack was successful. The faces of the team members were filled with joy because they had found an approach to confront the enemy. Without finishing his cry of happiness, one of the junior commanders was shot with an arrow right in the eye. The sounds of delight changed to screams of pain. The partner was also in shock from such events. The skeletons responded with a rain of arrows at this moment, catching the opponents in a loss of concentration. The detachment's affairs were not in the best situation. Shields became protection against these actions of the troops. Moreover, using the barrier, it was possible to escape from fire attacks, which is what one of the magicians did. After fending off a torrent of arrows, the squad decided to launch a counterattack to finish off the remaining skeletons. Azazel was getting closer to his enemies. Crowds of corpses kept coming and going for their new master. But he only needed their life force, which he began to pump out of them. The faces of dead people took on a less and less alive appearance, and they bled more and more. All the energy was pumped out. The bodies of people were no longer needed and continued to burn in the fire of their own allies. The necromancer sent all the collected power into the ground to summon the 7th Legion. The new skeletons were much larger and stronger than the old ones, due to feeding on human mana. Without having time to relax and rest, the captain and his squad saw a new enemy army. The speed of the skeletons also increased, and immediately one of them attacked the commander. Having managed to dodge the labries, the magician attacked by the enemy formed the order of further actions. From the matter of his own mana, he formed a sword, with which he immediately launched a counterattack. The skeletons did not evade the commander, not only they themselves, but also their limbs scattered. There were too many opponents, and we had to react to their every move, not letting them get closer to us. But there were more and more waves of the enemy. The captain was already wondering where the help was. They have already seen and watched how he confronts and fights with the rebels. Abegor was only glad to watch such a spectacle, because the arrogant captain began the attack without them. A dark-haired man with an athletic build and a serious character approached the observer. He didn't like to waste his time, and just like in this situation, he wanted to get down to business right away. He asked where Asmodeus was now, who was just in the fire of battle, which Abegor pointed out. He was always impatient and was the first to jump into battle, so he might not have time to wait for help. According to the newly arrived metahuman, Abegor did not help his comrade, since in the event of the death of the commander, he would take his place. But he didn't admit it. He said he just needed a strong team spirit and emotional support. Although this cunning magician was exactly the kind that in his time destroyed Raphael, speaking out loud about a possible vacant position, there were slices of joy and sarcasm in his voice. Abegor turned to the commander of the 3rd Raid Detachment, or as he is also called, the King of Battle. And in response, he received contempt for raising such questions, and in general, he irritated the head of the detachment. But he didn't care about his irritability, since the pride of killing Raphael still filled him. And his next goal was the death of the former master's elder brother. After all, necromancers are not immortal, because divine elixirs from the Order of Elijah can be used against them. Abegor called the boy who carried all the supplies of the elixir in his bag. He opened and showed what reserves of this good he had, with the help of which he could resist even necromancers. All these potions were once invented by the American guilds to hunt criminal necromancers. Vatican priests in Europe used their magical powers to create a special level of holy water. The commander of the 3rd Detachment did not want to take these drugs and refused them in every possible way. After all, what kind of battle king would use elixirs when you can deal with it with your fists? But Abegor was weak in close combat and took a couple of these and ordered the guy with the backpack to distribute them to everyone else. Tamiel nodded his head, confirming that he had heard the order and went to carry out the assigned task. One by one, he distributed cones with magical liquid inside to the guild troops. I even decided to offer it to the commander of the 3rd Detachment when I noticed that I had not yet shared it with him. But he again refused the elixir and showed what kind of thing he had for such cases. He once received this artifact from a saint with whom he spent a great night. And Abegor remembered this incident well, for which he reproached the detachment commander. Suddenly, the captain felt a gaze on him that seemed to burn right through his body. He immediately began to look for where that person or that creature was watching him. More and more, he felt eyes glued to him but could not find them. But everyone was watching him. All the skeletons who took part in the battle, even individual skulls were watching him. This was another of Azazel's abilities, the gaze of the dead, only used on skeletons. He could look after each of them, no matter where he was and no matter what condition the skeleton was in. It could even create the feeling that he himself was opposite his enemies. The necromancer was once again convinced that these hunters were somehow involved and responsible for the death of his younger brother. and he thought through all the actions down to the smallest detail in order to collect all the culprits in one place, to destroy them with their own hands at once, as they once did to Raphael. The entire battlefield was filled with dead people and immobilized skeletons. Asmodeus, by the sweat of his brow, fought against the monsters all this time, and hoped that this was the last invasion. But having heard a previously unfamiliar sound, he paid attention to the cane that made it and to its owner. Lemmer approached him, as always, with a smile on his face, but causing fear in people. Feeling the bad energy wafting from the Dullahan of the 7th Legion, the commander of the 4th Detachment took a fighting stance. At such a gesture, the necromancer's servant began to use his magic against the enemy. Asmodeus began to lose mana in huge quantities and stopped controlling his own body. The Dullahan continued to cast spells on the commander and used ancient magic. The captain of the squad stopped moving altogether, but not of his own free will, but as if he were being squeezed by large palms. Taking his own sword in his hands and turning the tip towards his stomach, he plunged it into the uncontrollable body. He seemed to be one of the best commanders of the guild, but he turned out to be so weak against just the spirit of Hela. Throwing a small skull towards Asmodeus, the Dullahan decided to end his torment. The squad leader pulled the sword out of his own body and redirected it slightly, but towards the heart. The captain, who had screamed for mercy a few seconds ago, fell in front of Lemore and his master. Azazel felt the presence of all the culprits near the building and told his servant to collect the souls of the dead. With a smile on his face, the head of the 7th Legion immediately began to carry out the order. The staff stuck into the ground began to collect mana from previously killed people and monsters. With each new soul, new skulls of the dead appeared on the staff, and the staff itself became larger. The necromancer decided to use the previously prepared strategy and directed his gaze towards the burning building. The dome, which was previously created by dead insects, acted on the building and began to destroy it. The debris of the building fell on the surviving hunters, but not everyone had time to react to this rockfall. The commander of the 4th Detachment was informed that communication with Asmodeus had been interrupted a couple of minutes ago. He could not believe his ears. They wanted to find out the operational situation from the observation detachment, but there was no contact with them either. After talking with each other, the partners came to the conclusion that black magic had been used on the house. Amidst all this chaos, the 2nd Garen Guild raiding party arrived from the fire and debris. The commander of the arriving detachment came out of the car, wearing a good suit, expensive glasses frames, ashen hair, and the name Oriax. And he asked his old friend Shax if everyone who had been invited had arrived on the battlefield. There was complete anarchy going on around. Everything was burning, falling, and being destroyed from the squad's struggle with the necromancer. Shax did not like the phrase of the arriving squad leader, as if he should report to the second one. The arriving captain explained this by saying that his rank in the guild was much higher, and since he asks for information about the situation, the King of Fights must immediately provide it. Is it above? I don't agree with this. With a grin on his face, Shax doubted the words spoken. After such impudence, Oriax proposed to find out who was more important here and now. The King of Fights was only provoked by this proposal, and he agreed with pleasure. One of the commanders had already begun to accumulate mana, as if preparing for a real battle. They didn't seem to care what was happening around them, or why they were called here in the first place. Abegor arrived in time and stopped a possible mini-war between the heads of the detachments, and he immediately pointed to the burning building, hinting that they had a completely different task here. Their enemy at the moment was a terrible necromancer who possessed great power. And if they start fighting with each other, then their enemy will simply run away from fear, said Abegor. Of course, he managed to stop a possible fight, but despite all this, the joke remained ignored. Looking at the building consumed by fire, Azazel began to cast a new spell. All those who have never lived in this world will rise up, answer my call. Black magic began to move through the rubble, resembling the tentacles of an octopus. And underneath them a shape was formed that resembled a shadow with brightly burning eyes. There was also help on the guild side, and more cars arrived at the scene. Troops of the Garen Guild began to emerge from them, wearing bulletproof vests and shields. A man began to get out of the car, whose arrival had been awaited for a long time, and he finally arrived. It was the vice head of the guild who demanded to report on the current situation on the battlefield. The detachment commanders hesitated, because the situation was clearly not in their favor. The earth began to tremble, literally shaking the entire space, and the vice chief drew attention to the cause of these phenomena. A huge necromancer warrior, who was created from the rubble of destroyed buildings, emerged from the fire. The size of the golem surprised all the top officials of the guild. They had never seen such a large one before. The golem looked at these little people, who were like insects to a person. The enemy, assembled from stones, began to non-stop cause damage to everything around. With his large hands, he hit the ground, trying to hit the magicians with these attacks. The vice chief also did not hesitate in the current situation, and ordered an attack on the golem. Considering that the enemy's size is too huge, he found a drawback in this. It was slow. The magicians, having listened to all the commander's instructions, immediately headed towards the enemy. To the rest, he outlined a more important goal. This is the murder of the newcomer. We need to find him so that he will pay for all the damage caused by his presence on Earth. The commanders interrupted the speech of their leader, because there was no longer any need to look for anyone. Together with his huge army, Azazel, who was calm despite the situation, walked towards them. Abegor was delighted at such a meeting, because he believed that the prey itself had come into his clutches. For him, the necromancer had now faced his own death by coming here on his own. Hux told him to close his mouth to this upstart, and watch from the side how the battle would take place. Auriax was in this situation to help, since he was a healing magician. Full of confidence and strength, the commander of the second detachment placed this burden on his large shoulders. In parallel with everything that was happening, members of the detachments waged war against a huge giant made of stone. By creating fireballs, they directed them at the monster and launched an attack. To the golem, these were just little people that could be compared to ants. For protection, the team used defense magic, a magical shield consisting of mana. The giant did not stop striking at the formed dome above the magicians. They could barely hold back the onslaught of their opponent's attacks and were at the limit of their capabilities. With the sound of ordinary glass cracking, the shield began to crack under the golem's fists. The magicians were surprised by what happened because this happened for the first time in hundreds of previous battles. But the attack with the stone hand kept getting closer. Someone was crushed, and someone managed to dodge. For the guild, things were getting worse and worse noticing this. The commander decided not to hesitate. He immediately rushed towards the necromancer, after whose death his troops would also fall. But the skeletons were not so simple. They moved towards the enemies of their owner. Shax with his blow broke through the wall of skeletons of the dungeon and freed his way. The skeletons seemed to have not diminished. They stayed, surrounding the commander. But this only brought joy to the captain of the squad. He attacked every monster he encountered. He dealt damage not only with his own fists, but also with his mana. Even in a difficult situation, the smile did not leave Shax's face and he was ready to stand until the last. Of course, it was easier for him to fight, because he had the commander of another squad as his partner, who covered the rear of his fellow guild member with the help of his own techniques. But Auriax was surprised by the armor of the skeletons, because after so many lightning strikes, there was not a scratch on them. Azazel ordered his troops to repel the new target, and sent the skeletons towards the enemy. The rebels surrounded two magicians standing to the side, but that was not all. Hearing a new roar, reminiscent of stones flying from a mountain, Abegor pointed his finger towards the golem. There were already two of them, two huge stone warriors who did not give in to attacks. The magicians had already spent all the mana they had to fight one, but then they were even more surprised. The vice head understood how this was happening. The first golem destroyed everything around, and a second one appeared from the rubble. Immediately realizing this, he called the commander of the second detachment, who was in battle. He pointed to the necromancer and ordered him to be killed quickly to end the battle. Shax would have gladly begun to carry out the order, but for now he was in battle. Having broken the skull of one of the monsters, he immediately received a blow from him in the back with a sword. Even though he was distracted for only a second, he paid for his mistake in that very moment. The commander's right arm began to grow sharply, as if the muscles were beginning to grow endlessly. Because of this, Shax became even more enraged and literally wiped out his enemy from the face of the earth. But even here it didn't get any easier. Immediately, a huge spear fell from above as if from heaven. The commander of the Garen Guild squad barely managed to dodge the unexpected attack from the air. A skeleton emerged from the fire and launched the previous spear, aiming to repeat the attack. They could no longer dodge the second such spear. Shax had already been nailed to the guild's car by it. A whole squad of magicians ran to their captain to help him and keep him alive. Azazel at this time gave new orders to his army from the 7th Legion. The task of the skeleton archers was to rain down a barrage of arrows on the magicians who were still alive. One of the commanders shouted at them to dodge so as not to fall under attack. It was already late. All the arrows flew straight to the target, into the heads of their rivals. The captain of the squad looked at the archers who killed an entire division of his warriors in a second. Revenge. That was the solution he saw, forming new lightning and wanting to kill the rebels. Before he even had time to make the first attack, a spear was already flying at him, but Abegor was sleeping the captain. Auriax's savior advised him to run without looking back. But at the same time, he himself wondered why all the skeletons were pursuing him. Abegor was only happy with this situation and warned the enemy not to underestimate him. The force of the skeleton's blows is great, but not for him. He was able to stop the weapon with one block. The vice head of the Garen Guild kept fighting the golems and telling the troops not to stop the attacks. One of the huge stone warriors turned his back to the enemies and simply walked away from the magicians. He sought more houses to destroy them and create more of his kind. The vice chief understood the reason for the departure of one giant and decided to deal with him on his own. He took out his sword and began to tell his subordinates the plan of the golems. One separates the hunters to reduce the effectiveness of attacks, while the second destroys buildings to create more golems. The units were told to attack before there were too many enemies. The drone flew over the battle site and broadcast all the information to the administration building. The president himself observed the situation, and for the first time in his life saw such power. The enemy forces were so strong that the best warriors of the guild were in shock. Even the vice head of the guild fought Fanuel at one time defeated a kraken much larger than this golem. However, now the situation was getting worse and worse for the Garen guild. Watching all this, the president wondered what kind of summoning ability this was. No matter what powers Azazel possessed, the president was confident that he would bring him to his knees. Shax woke up after such a large loss of blood. His squad was still near him, and they threw him an elixir of restoration so that he could heal his wounds. While flying in the air, the elixir crashed as it was precisely hit by an arrow from one of the archers. Having given another elixir, but this time directly into his hands, the subordinate brought his captain up to date. This is all. Shax himself understood and pointed his finger at the dead under the leadership of the Necromancer. The commander set a goal for himself to kill the leader of all the rebel monsters. He gave the order to the squad to help others in the offensive, while he himself remained to deal with Azazel. Oriax, running past, drew the attention of the commander of the second detachment to one of the golems. He was no longer lifting debris, but an entire building that weighed about 7,000 tons. Raised by the building, the golem launched into the sky as if throwing a spear in a competition. The vice head of the guild, who was fighting with another golem, also noticed a building flying past him. The president, who was following the events, realized how bad the situation was for his troops. The purpose of this action was other residential complexes in order to increase the number of golems significantly. Also cause panic in all hunters, so that they in turn lose concentration. Azazel had no intention of stopping, but only wanted to destroy everyone who stood in his way. Mages were dying every second. Troops were losing more and more allies in battle. Fortunately for the association, those with the strongest abilities in the guild arrived on the battlefield. The number of magicians was still small, and Oriax had not seen his savior for a long time. The aforementioned was already under the control of the Dullahan of the 7th Legion and could not move. Abegor was at a loss why his own body did not obey and did not move. Lammer was, as always, with a smile on his face and told his enemy to wait a little until he met his master. The young hunter Tamiel, who betrayed his teacher's brother, trembled with fear as he watched everything. The Necromancer appeared in front of Abegor with his army of the dead of the 7th Legion. The motionless and helpless enemy apologized and shouted that he was not the only one to blame for Raphael's death. The hands of skeletons began to appear under him. The Necromancer used the spell of Grasp of the Undead. The young hunter, covering his mouth with his palm, barely restrained his cry for help. Because I myself heard Abegor screaming, whose eyes were pressed inward. Later, these same eyes were pulled out by skeletons from the face of their owner's enemy. Abegor could no longer scream. He only made some sounds that he only had the strength to make. Before that, begging for mercy, he said that he had not even seen Raphael, and was in no way involved in this. And now Azazel was asking if he now sees the man whom he once betrayed. A moment before his death, Abegor began to remember the already dead body of the former master, and the people he was with then, at that moment of the murder, flashed before his eyes. Remembering all this, he screamed louder and louder for mercy in order to stay alive. It was already too late to ask for anything, of course. He was slowly being separated from his own body. They also tore off the head and inserted the eyeballs back into the bloody holes. Azazel used the gaze of the deceased to view the events he needed. Already wounded, Raphael wanted to find out and perhaps forgive the people who betrayed him for this. But they only told him to accept his fate and die at the hands of his former friends. The Necromancer felt the souls of these people on the battlefield and was glad that he would not have to look for them. He immediately decides to call upon another special warrior from the 7th Legion. A servant of his master appears from the portal resembling a man in a black robe. Tamiel did not understand what kind of demon was summoned by the mentor's brother, whom he had not seen before. Caligini from the 7th Legion knelt before his master and was ready to carry out the instructions. Azazel ordered that all the people who were in the gaze of the deceased be brought to him. "Your will is law for me, and I begin to fulfill the task given to me," the warrior said. "So let's do the will of the master," said Caligini to all the skeletons and golems. "Let the hunt begin, where the first prey will be the commander of the 2nd detachment." He was just flexing his fists and was going to finish his job. Shax used the power of mana and used his special technique, which affected him. His body became covered with fur, claws grew, fangs appeared, and his eyes changed their appearance. In predator mode, he could last half an hour and thought that was more than enough. The king of battle rushed at the squad of skeletons nearby to tear them to shreds. Hearing the steps, the beast looked towards the noise and saw its future enemy. Caligini walked towards him with a confident gait, saying that he did not know this breed of cat. The opponents took up fighting stances, showing by this action that they were both ready for battle. Shax, of course, began the attack first and made a sharp jerk towards the warrior. He, in turn, also directed an attack at the beast and swung his sword. The warrior of the 7th Legion was surprised that he missed and no longer even saw where the enemy was. Having discovered it in the sky above my head, I was shocked by the speed and agility of the animal. Shax's face expressed joy, because he was able to outwit and find himself in an advantageous position, or so it seemed to him. Caligini gave the order to the archers to throw this beast to the ground. They had already pulled the bow. The King of Battle reflected the arrows flying at him with his blows and hoped that this would end soon. There were too many arrows and he couldn't dodge them all. They stuck into his body one by one. The body with needles sticking out in all directions flew down as the warrior of the 7th Legion wished. Caligini began to run towards the prey and had already prepared his sword for an attack. He stabbed Shax with his sword straight into the shoulder to cut off his arm. Having concentrated mana in the area of the collarbone, the commander of the 2nd detachment withstood the blow and prepared for a counterattack. The warrior of the 7th Legion dodged the fist and said that all the efforts of the guild were useless. He delivered a direct blow to the chest of the commander of the 2nd detachment, but that was not the end. He grabbed the hand of a wounded enemy and carried him over himself to literally stick him into the ground. After this, the beast's breathing became labored and he began to spit blood on the ground. With the phrase that now his suffering would end, Caligini raised his sword along with his body and threw the enemy to the side. Shax was thrown into the car, bleeding and could no longer feel his body. The warrior seemed to be burning in the flames of his mana and was about to take the prey to his master. Seeing the enemy's attempts to move somehow, he struck several more blows with magic. The almost dead commander of the 2nd detachment of the Garen Guild began to be surrounded by skeletons. Auriax saw his fallen comrade, who was already among the crowd of monsters. He immediately rushed to save him from the trap, not realizing that he was going to certain death. Having concentrated his magic, he used a lightning spell and smashed the skeletons to pieces. The magician of lightning and medicine hurried to his comrade and ran without looking around. Shax's killer appeared in front of him, as if from underground, and did not allow him to go further. Attempts to remove him from the road were in vain because he reflected all the spells. At this moment, Auriax decides to use all his remaining mana and concentrates it in his hands. But this is immediately stopped by Caligini because he cuts off the hands of another of his targets. The highest-ranking captain falls to his knees and bows before the warrior of the 7th Legion. The masked demon neutralized his prey and said that he would now take it to its owner. This was what Auriax feared most of all, because what enormous power the master has, since he has such strong servants. It is not necessary to bring the whole victim to the master. It could be in pieces. The skeleton immediately swung his axe. Phanuel again heard screams of pain, from which all the magicians who fell into the hands of the Necromancer's army screamed. The vice-head of the guild hesitated and began to look from side to side, because in the last call for help he heard the voice of Auriax. And anyway, as soon as everyone split up to help the troops, he didn't see them anymore. This was a serious problem for the guild troops on the battlefield, with their most powerful forces slowly disappearing. An idea popped into his head and he immediately called the surviving members of the Garen Guild. The only thing he could do was stay alive as long as possible. He also ordered all remaining hunters to do this and distribute it to those who are not nearby right now. After distributing the health elixirs, I set a new goal for the troops to gather the troops and protect the living commanders. A signal came from the radios from the surveillance squad, who turned out to be alive. The connection with them was simply interrupted. Phanuel asked to bring him a mana tracker so that he could gather the remaining troops and attack his enemies together. The contacts in the detachments reported to the vice-head of the guild that it was not possible to contact Auriax and Shaxix. About whom the news was accurate was about Abigor. The soldiers said that he died at the hands of the leader of the skeletons. After hearing this, the commander changed his plan. Now the priority was killing Azazel. The soldiers accepted the order and ran to convey it to the rest of the survivors. The vice-chief kept wondering whether his comrades were alive, but it was impossible to find out this information now. He spent too much time fighting the giant golems that emerged from the buildings. Phanuel was too smug against a necromancer who could easily summon such monsters. After the negotiation hours, the vice-chief contacted Samael and asked if he was watching. The same one watched through drones that were flying in the sky above all the chaos happening in the area. He was told that he could not cope with the necromancer without help, because he was too strong. In this case, they promised to negotiate with the apartment manager and hold out as long as possible. The magicians living in this area had long been evacuated, but decided to make sure that they knew what happened to their home and the entire business center. Phanuel was delighted with this situation, because by equalizing the number of warriors, they would increase the chances of victory. The detachment's plan of action immediately changed. Now they had to stay in place and hide here, then wait for the inhabitants of these houses to come, because the hunters living here are very strong and will become excellent support. It seemed that there was no longer any need to be afraid of the army of rebel monsters. But this was a delusion. An earthquake occurred, and cracks appeared on the roads near houses. Huge skeletal hands emerged from the cracks and seemed to begin dragging the whole house underground.